Hi, in this section you were introduced to some basic language elements of Java. In addition, you explored the structure of a typical program to include class structure and method structure. The section also briefly introduced the concept of object-oriented programming. You might want to bookmark this section, as you'll find that you refer to the syntactical structure information regularly when first learning how to program. As you read through the text, you were introduced to some important vocabulary terms or phrases. I wanted to take a moment to provide some additional information, some clarifying information about these specific terms and phrases. Keywords. Keywords are reserved words and they have a specific purpose in Java. You can only use them for that specific purpose. For instance, the keyword new. The keyword new is used to create new class objects. You can only use the keyword new for this purpose. So you couldn't use the, let's say you wanted to create a variable, you couldn't call that variable new. If you tried to, you would get a compilation error where your program wouldn't compile. Comments. You are introduced to comments in your first programming practice activity. Comments are part of the program that are not executed and they provide information to the programmer. They come in two different forms, single line comments and multi-line comments. Here's an example of what they look like in the program. Be sure you understand the syntax of each comment type. Syntax. Here's a word that we throw around a lot, but we don't necessarily specify what it means. So this term means it's the set of rules that govern how a particular Syntax is the set of rules that govern how programming elements within a programming language are written. So as you'll learn more programming languages, you'll find that many languages have the same elements, like conditional statements such as if-else, or iteration statements like for and while loops, methods, or functions. They're called functions in other languages, arrays, and these kind of things. They're all common to programming languages. What differs between those languages is the syntax. So understanding a language syntax is one of the keys to actually mastering the language. Okay, then we have the term variables. Variables are placeholders for data, and the data that's stored in a variable is dependent on the variable's data type. So this stuff will make more sense in just a moment. So let's talk about data types. Okay, so data types specify the type of data that can be stored in a variable. There are 8 variable types. They're listed here on the screen. As you're reviewing the different data types available, it's important to understand that 2 of the data types are used to store decimal values with a decimal point. Those are float and double. Generally speaking, in this class, when we create when we declare variables that are going to store a decimal value, we'll use the double data type. 4 of the data types are used to store integer values. Okay, so these 4 highlighted here store integer values. Generally speaking, when we create programs in this course, we use the int data type. So remember, integers are whole numbers and 0. You need to be careful when declaring variables that will store numerical data. You want to ensure that you declare the variable using the correct data type to go along with the numerical value being stored. If you're going to store a whole number, you're going to want to use a whole number or 0. You're going to want to use int. If you're going to store a decimal number, you're going to want to go ahead and use double, or one of the appropriate ones. But at any rate, if the data type you list in your variable declaration and the value stored in that variable, if they don't match, you'll get there will be an error in your program and your program will not compile. Okay, let's talk about declaring variables. Okay, so declaring a variable tells the IDE that you're going to use a variable in the program. And before you can use a variable, you must declare it. So when declaring variables, you create a Java program statement that includes the variable data type. Okay, so this is the basic syntax of it. It's data type, so one of those 8 data types that we just introduced, and the identifier, which is also known as the variable's name, and the semicolon. Okay, it's important to note that there are specific rules that govern how a variable's identifier can be created. So be sure you understand these rules. So here is an example of declaring a variable. I've declared this variable. Its data type is int. The identifier is my age, and it's followed with a semicolon. Okay, so now let's talk about initializing variables. When you initialize a variable, you give that variable a declared variable. So it has to be declared. You can't initialize a variable unless it's been declared. Okay, that's important. So you give a declared value. You give a declared variable value. Okay, you give it data. You store data within that variable. So you must declare the variable before you can initialize it. Although you can combine the 2 steps into one combination step, and we'll do that in just a moment. Okay. So this is the basic syntax. So when we're initializing a variable, we create a program statement that includes the identifier name, the assignment operator. So when I talk about the assignment operator, I'm talking about the equal sign. So it's important to note when we learn later, this does not mean equal, like equal to in mathematical terms. Instead, it is an assignment operator. It assigns a value to a variable. Okay, very important. So we've got the assignment operator, then we've got whatever the value is that's going to be stored in that variable, and then we've got the semicolon. So let's take a look and see an example of initializing a variable. So you'll remember we declared the variable int my age, right? Now I'm going to initialize that variable with a value. Notice that the names are the same, but in the initializing program statement, in that statement, we don't include a data type. We just refer to the identifier that we want to give value to. Okay, so I've got my age, I've got the assignment operator of equal, I've got my age, which is 45, followed by the semicolon. Okay, declaring and initializing variables all in one step. We talked about that just a moment ago. So you can do it all in one Java programming statement. Let's see what the basic syntax looks like. Okay, so the basic syntax, you're going to start with the data type. Then you're going to have the identifier. You're going to use the assignment operator because you're going to give that value. You're going to assign that variable a value. Okay, so we use the assignment operator. And then we have the value, whatever the value is going to be stored to the, that is going to be stored to the variable, and then the semicolon. So let's see an example of this. Okay, so now this is an all-in-one, the one that's highlighted here. So its data type is still going to be int, and this one is, the identifier is cat age. Okay, we use the assignment operator because we're going to give the variable cat age value, and we're going to give the cat age variable the value of 7. So we've got int cat age, the assignment operator, the value 7, and the semicolon. Okay, so if you'll notice, this takes the 2 steps, the step 1 of declaring a variable and the step 2 of initializing the variable, and it combines them into one step. Okay, so then another concept that's addressed is methods. A method. So a method in Java programming, what it is it's used to perform some type of action. Okay, so a method isn't always needed. So what it does is instead it just kind of sits to the side of the program, and it just sits there and waits to be called. It waits to perform this action that it encompasses, right? So when we call it, we basically say, hey, we want you to be, start working. it'll do whatever action it's supposed to do, and then it will end. And so the way that it works is the method is called, it performs some type of action, and then it returns to its dormant state, the not in use state, until at some later point it might be called again. That's what methods are, okay? If you've ever done any kind of programming in, say, Python or something, they call methods functions. C++ also functions. So these two terms are, the concepts are interchangeable. The concept idea, but we refer to them in this course as methods, okay? The main method is a method, okay, like we just talked about, but it's a special method, okay? The main method runs the program, and all execution of the program happens from within the main. And remember, like I said in a previous video, there can only be one main method within a program, okay? It's important to understand the execution path of a Java program. A program's execution starts at the top of the main, and it works its way down line by line until it gets to the bottom of the main. There are times, however, where the program will alter its course from top to bottom, for instance, in the case of calling a method. Okay, so let's say that we're working from top to bottom through the main method, and then we come to a call to one of these other methods that's just laying dormant, right? So when we call that method, the focus of the program leaves the main method and it goes to the method that was called. Okay, so the method that was called, it performs its action, and then once the action is complete, the focus returns back to the main method. And then subsequently, the next line after that method call then gets executed, and it continues to step down through the program towards the bottom of the main, towards the end of the main method. Okay. So also in this section, the concept of object-oriented programming was discussed. So object-oriented programming is a tenet of Java programming, like one of the foundational elements of Java programming. However, please note, this introduction was super, super brief, and you really aren't supposed to take away some, strong understanding of the object-oriented programming from that simple review, okay? We will definitely explore more object-oriented programming in later modules. So if you don't understand it right now, that completely makes sense. Don't feel like you need to know more about object-oriented programming than you do, because it really was a very brief overview. Okay, so with that, that's it for this section. I hope that this helps explain some of the basic language elements of Java. Remember, if you have questions about this section's concepts or have questions during your programming practice, just reach out to me.